Alright, so today we're going to have a session that is going to be on the Active Directory. It's going to be the part 2 of the earlier session, and this is going to be an understanding session that would be something that is necessary for you to learn the other technologies which require Active Directory like Exchange. So once these are done, then you should be good to move on with either learning the advanced level of Active Directory or else the any product which requires a backend Active Directory infrastructure. And my name is Ashwin, and www.roadtomaster.ms is my blog, and that's where you can see all these recording added. And so most of you might know me already, and yeah, I'm an infrastructure consultant with around 8 years experience, working on multiple Microsoft infrastructure related products such as AD, messaging like Exchange, SCCMs, COM, and other system standard products, and virtualization, Microsoft Cloud like Office 365. So that's all about what I do normally, and let's get this part going. So as an agenda, what we're going to cover up is we're going to actually cover up what is an asset property of a database, and what is meant by Active Directory sites, and then we can look into the AD sites and services, and then we can look into the Active Directory replication, then the Active Directory domain controller first of all, and then we can talk about global catalog server. We can look into the logical and the physical components of Active Directory. Then we can look into the FSMO roles, and finally we can, once we do the domain functional level and the force functional level, we should be good to install an AD server. We're going to use the next Windows Server 2012 to install Active Directory, and that's the latest, at least at the point of the session today. That's the latest Windows that is in the market. Alright, so let's get going. So how many of you know what is an asset property of a database? It's probably something that you all have learned in either in any other database related class or sometimes in the graduation. So basically we're going to actually go ahead and have just a brush up on that, whatever you learned, or whatever you know earlier, so that we are all on the same page. Okay? Perfect. Alright, so if you look into the computer world, asset is actually a set of property that guarantee database transactions are proceeded reliably. That is the best way to say what it is. Basically, I just did the asset. The name came from 4 different words. That is, A stands for atomicity, C stands for consistency, I stands for isolation, D stands for durability. So, and another thing which we need to just saw in the earlier definition is transaction. What is really a transaction? When you talk about database, every logical operation that you do on a data that is saved in the database is called a transaction. It can be either you input a new data, or else you modify a new data, or else you delete the data. Each and every operation that you do on those data is called a transaction. Okay, so that's a general term. You might be doing many possibilities. Like, so you might be doing sometimes deletion, updation, modifications, or whatever you are trying to do at that point. So we can generalize that as a transaction, and I would be using that in the upcoming slides. Probably we're going to actually talk about what is atomicity, what is consistency, isolation, durability, etc. Okay, so in short, we can say it's a set of property that guarantee that database transactions are proceeded reliably. Okay, and if you say about atomicity, what is an atom? Atom is something that in chemistry says it's the something that cannot be changed, right? That's what is atom. It's the it's something which gives an identity to a chemical compound or whatever it is. So when you talk about atomicity in terms of computer database, to be exact, it is actually like either all the transactions that you are doing on the database will be done, or else nothing will be performed. What do you mean by that? Let's say you want to do a modification to 20 tables, and each table is connected to each other. So the transaction will only complete if all the 20 tables are updated, not just 1 or 2 and then leave the 18. So you need to update every 20. What it does, it actually updates every 20 table. Suppose what if the last table, when it was updating, something happened to the database, maybe a power failure happened. Does it leave it with a partial change, or what happens? It is actually this way. If one part of the transaction fails, the entire transaction fails, which means even the 18 changes that you did will not come in effect. Okay, and at the end of the day, the database state is left unchanged. Okay, so that's why it is called atomicity. Atomicity means the state is unchanged. An external influence cannot change it. First of all, it cannot be changed because of any faulty transactions. Until the entire transaction completes, the database state will never be changed. Okay. What about the consistency? Consistency means every transaction will bring the database to one valid state to another, which means I talked about changing 20 values. Consistency means after changing those 20 values, you're not going to find a database which is unstable. It will be still a valid state. It will still run. So, which means you can only do a transaction on a database if the output of the transaction is going to keep the database in a valid state. Okay? And the other thing is isolation. What do you mean by isolation? The very simple way to talk about is the isolation means each and every transaction that you do is isolated with another transaction that might be happening at the same time. Let's say it this way. There is a transaction number 1 and there is a transaction number 2 being done by 2 different users. The user number 2 is not going to see the transaction which is being done by the user 1. Neither the user 1 can see the transaction that is made by the other person. So it is isolated. Okay? And it's basically a simple way to say each transaction has to execute in total isolation. And what about the next one? Durability. Durability means once a transaction is committed, it will remain committed, which means once you make the changes to the 20 changes that we did in the beginning, due to no other reason, that changes are not going to be reverted back. If you want to change it, then another transaction is required which will change those things. But without a transaction, none of the data that you have in the database will be changed. Okay, and that is one part. Another part is, even in the case of a power failure or crashes or anything like that, there should be an option to bring back the database to a usable level, and that is which means this way: even if a database is crashed, you should be in a position to restore the database and bring it back to a position where it can be used. So that's about the durability. So that's the 4 things which you should understand in any database world. Okay, so let's take about how does Microsoft uses these for Active Directory. So it is very simple actually. The process is this way: whenever a change happens, the request for the transaction comes to the memory of the system. The memory does the change to 2 locations. One is it makes a log file, and the second one, it makes the change in the database. Okay, log file is a simple text file, so there's no complication making the log file. So making the log file will be faster than making the change in the database. Okay, and so suppose you're making a change which requires 20 transactions to complete. Each transaction will be logged in a text file, as well as it will be logged to the database as well. Okay, and there will be a checkpoint file which will actually keep a track between the log file and the database. Like say, it will keep a track of how many log files are already or you can say how many amount of data that you have in the log file is added to the database. Okay, so it keeps a track of where the log files stand and where the database stand. We can make it simple looking at this way. The same example of 20 transactions. As I said, the log files are created much faster. Suppose say it already made 18 transaction files. Still, it is still updating the 5th one in the database. And finally, it completed the 20th one as well. And it is still doing, let's say, 6th or the 7th one, or let's say the 10th one. So 10 more is required. So there is going to be a checkpoint file which is actually going to track whether we are done with the 10 log files or whether we are done with 2 log files, and how many more log files data is required to be added to the database. And the reason to track that is, suppose at the point when it was actually at 8 and all the 20 log files are created, the power failure happened, the system went down. And the system, when it comes back online, what it basically does is it looks at the database, and the database says, hey, I have done already 5 or let's say 7 transactions, and I have to do the rest of the transaction. I have to do 13 transactions more. And what it will do, it actually goes to the log file, it reads the log file, and it will replay the data that you have in the log from 8 all the way up to 13th. So it is the checkpoint file which actually decided, or which was used to understand how many logs are already read, so it won't replay those logs. So that's one way. And the good part of that is going to be, unless every transactions are done, it is not going to be shown as complete, which means even if the log files suppose say we have a transaction which requires 20 log files to be made to complete it, but when it was actually creating the 18th one, the power failure happened. So all the 18 log files what you made is of no use. It's not going to make the change. And the other thing is consistency. Okay, when all the 20 log files are actually added to the database, the condition of the database or the state of the database at that point will be still good enough to mount and get going. Okay, and isolation is very simple. Suppose you are making a user account today, right now, at the same time you're making a group. It doesn't matter. It runs with its own total isolation between each other. Okay, durability, there are multiple things. That is one I said just now. In case a power failure happens, it can replay the logs and bring back the database. And if we don't have a proper log, then we can actually use like a backup, whatever we are using, a restore from the backup that we have taken. So that's about the ACID property of the database. So are we all good with that? Like, we all have a good understanding on ACID property and how an Active Directory uses them? Okay, all good. So there is no question about the log files and the database. So this is something which you need to understand. In terms of Active Directory, you have a log file as well as you have a database file. Okay. And so I think we can get it going to the next slide. All right. We already talked about domains. We already talked about forest. We already talked about tree, etc. in the last slide. Basically, in the last part. Well, now today we're going to actually talk about AD sites. Okay. What is an AD site? To be exact in definitions, you can actually say AD site represents the physical structure of your network, which means it's basically the way that you see the world. Like say one site, maybe one of the city, and another site will be a city which is far away from the from each other. Like say Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, US. It's a country which is quite far off. So that's the way we call sites, right? So what we do is actually sites are created so that we can group the computers or the domain controllers and identify how we can communicate or reach to those servers. Like say you can group every server that you have in Mumbai and make it as one site. Group every servers that you have in basically every domain controllers. When I talk about servers, we are talking about domain controller today. So whenever we say a server, let's take it as a domain controller. So every domain controller that you have in Mumbai, we can group them as a Mumbai site. And you can actually say every domain controller that you see in Bangalore, we can call it as a Bangalore site, and the same with Chennai. Okay. So what is basically happening here? If you look at every site, like say you have an internet or you have a MPLS line which is connecting these sites, so you have a physical connectivity done as well. So we have to make that in the sites as well. So we do this way. In AD, the sites are connected by site link. Okay? And what is the site link? It is your physical connection that you have with your internet service provider. And every connections that you take with the service provider has got a cost involved, right? You don't get it for free. You pay to the ISP, you get a link. So every site link that you make in AD, it will have a cost associated. By default, every site link that you make will have a cost added as 100. you can change it. I mean, it's a default value which comes up on every site link. So basically, let's keep it like this. Sites, it groups DC or domain controllers, and site links will connect this site each other. Okay. So let's talk about this in a bit more detail. Like say, what is a major requirement of site? That's basically this way. If you have a group of domain controller inside one site, like say inside Mumbai, I'm pretty much sure that these servers can communicate each other much faster because the network is local area network. It is 100% is being made by you. Basically, it will have a very good reliable connection, like a 1 Gbps local area network or 100 Mbps local area network connections. So that is a very high speed and highly reliable network, first of all, within the site, right? There are possibilities that, within the same site, like within Mumbai itself, like say suppose you have 2 buildings in Mumbai and those buildings are not really well connected. So what I need to tell is this way. Site is a collection of domain controllers which are well connected. So which means in Mumbai, if you have collection of servers which are not really well connected to the other one, you really need to make 2 different sites. Although physically, if you look at them, you might find them nearby. If your network is not good, if the network is not reliable between them, then you really need to go ahead and make 2 separate sites. Okay. The basic requirement of creating site is because inside the site, that is intra-site replication and inter-site replication happens differently. What do you mean by replication? All right, so I think that's true. So replication means copying the data across to multiple locations, like say exact same data. It's a copy or a replica. What do you say about that? Like say you have a server number 1 and server number 2. You make a change in server number 1, the change is copied across to server number 2. So at one point of time, both will have the same data, right? So within the site, if the connectivity is very good, it will be very, very easy for the replication to happen because you have a very good connection, very good internet connection, which makes it quite a lot possible or easier for it to replicate the change as soon as possible, right? Because the connectivity is very reliable. But think about between the site, you do not really have a reliable connection. So you can't really say that I made a change right now. You can't expect the change to be replicated across to the other server immediately. So that's the main reason for keeping 2 different replication. Okay, so let's talk about the intra-site replication in the first point in detail, and then we'll talk about the inter-site replication after this. Okay, we just said intra-site. The name itself says it happens between the DC in the same site. Okay, and whenever a change happens, the replication happens between the DC every 15 seconds after the change. Okay. So you can actually think it this way. You have many servers in your organization or many servers in the site. You can definitely think about this way. You made a change. The change will definitely go across to all the servers in about a minute in the same site, right? If you have so many servers, it will reach to every server within a minute. So because it happens, the replication happens every 15 seconds, right? And this replication happens automatically. You do not need to do anything in that. Like Active Directory does it automatically. Okay. Now let's talk about this way. Let me actually get the whiteboard shared up. Just a moment. Are we all able to see the whiteboard? Okay, perfect. So let's talk about this way. I'm going to pause this until I draw up a site and a few domain controllers, and then we'll talk about that. All right. So what I did right now is I made two sites here, and I made one site as Mumbai, another one as Bangalore, and in each site I have 3 domain controllers. The name is DZ01 all the way up to DZ06, and there is a site link which is connecting between the 2 domain controllers. This is the site link. Okay, and so what is actually happening here, basically? The arrow marks which I have shown is actually the direction of the replications, which you can see it's bi-directional in most of the place. So what I want to talk about is, let's focus about the Mumbai site at this point, just one site, and we can add Bangalore site later, and then we can look into adding up a 3rd site and see what happens at that point. Okay. So it is actually this way. The replication between DC01, DC02, and DC03 happens automatically. Okay, and it is something which happens every 15 seconds because that is within the site, right? That's what we discussed just now. And the other thing which we need to see is actually here is how does DZ02 know that there are 2 other domain controllers in the site? Like, say, how does he know that when the changes happen, whom to communicate with and whom to give the details? And that is taken care by somebody called KCC, Knowledge Consistency Checker. Okay. Knowledge Consistency Checker, what it does is it creates the topology automatically, and it will understand how many domain controllers do we have, and all sort of things. Okay, and that's what we actually said in the slide. If you look into the slide here, that there is an intra-site topology that is automatically generated by KCC, okay? And this runs on every domain controller. So whenever there is a change that is happening in the domain controller, let's say one of the domain controllers is down. Like, say, if you go back to the drawing, let's talk about the DC02 is down. What it actually happens at that point, the KCC will generate a new topology which will not have DC02 in it. So it can try to create a new topology. Let's say if DC02 is decommissioned, it will actually have a new site topology again. Okay? So that's the task of the KCC, to create a topology so that DC02 can discover and understand who and all are there in the neighbor and how he can reach to those servers. Okay? All right, so that's about the intra-site replication. And let's talk about the inter-site replication. Okay? The very first thing which I said is, in the intra-site is, it is automatically done, right? The intra-site replication happens automatically. But that's not the case here. Inter-site replication is created or made it's not made automatically. It is something that administrator makes. Okay? But there is one thing. But the Active Directory is going to automatically pick any one of the domain controller from each side and act it as a bridgehead server. What do you mean by that? Well, we can talk about that looking into the slides. If you look at the whiteboard, you can see here that the site link that you have between the site, that is Mumbai and Bangalore, is actually happening between DC02 and DC01, right? What actually happened is this way. Whenever you made a new site and created a link between them, the Active Directory automatically selected DC03 and DC04 as the bridgehead server. Okay? Probably let's name it as a bridgehead server here. Okay? And let's name this guy the same. Okay. So DC03 and 4 is actually a bridgehead server, which it automatically selected. What is the role of a bridgehead server? Why does Active Directory select the bridgehead server? It is actually this way. Whenever a change happens between the site, DC03 is not going to send the update to both DC05 and DC06, and all the three. It's not going to send it to every domain controller that is there in the other site. It is rather going to send it to the bridgehead server that you have in the other site, and the bridgehead server is not then going to replicate it to the DCs that you have in the site. So replication happens from DC03 to DC04, and then DC04 gives that data across the site. Okay. So it can be any DC. That is one thing which I said. The DC, how does this bridgehead server come in picture? Okay, it is a normal Active Directory server. It is a normal domain controller, nothing extra in it. Every domain controller that you have in the site is eligible to be a bridgehead server, and the bridgehead server is selected by Active Directory automatically. And the reason being that is, suppose say if it is a manual process, like DC04 is selected as a bridgehead server, what if the bridgehead server is down, like DC04 is down? That's the reason Active Directory makes or selects the bridgehead server automatically. So if one of the earlier bridgehead server is down, it looks for another one and makes it as a bridgehead server. But there is one thing. Suppose you say you have three different servers, the DC01, 02, and 03, but the processing capability of DC03 is better than the other two. In that case, the administrator can manually select a bridgehead server. But there is another thing which you need to understand is, if you select them manually, then if that server goes down, replication will be down. It will not discover automatically and make another one. Okay? So that's one thing, bridgehead server. And I said the KCC runs on every domain controller, right? KCC will be running on DC01, DC02, DC03, 4, 5, and 6. And what it does, it creates a topology, right? Within the site, it makes the topology. But if the KCC is running on a bridgehead server, it creates inter-site topology, that is topology between the site. So the KCC that is running on DC03 is responsible to create a topology or make the site Mumbai aware that there is a Bangalore site available next to you. Okay? So inter-site topology is generated by a KCC again, but not every KCC. The KCC that is running on a bridgehead server. All the other KCCs is going to just create intra-site topology. Okay? So due to that reason, the KCC that is running on a Bridget server is also called ISTG. What is ISTG? Inter-Site Topology Generator. So that is actually a KCC that is running on a Bridget server. Alright, so let's go back to the slide and then review the other things. That is, whatever we said just now, the inter-site replication, or the it's something that administrator makes it. It is not something that automatically is created. Okay, and the Active Directory is going to automatically pick a domain controller from each side and make it as a Bridget server. And Bridget server is going to replicate the changes between the site. This is something which I said, it is going to be much more efficient rather than a server talking to every other server across the site, right? It's going to be much efficient if you give the data to one of the server, and then that one server is responsible to replicate that change to everybody inside that site. And administrator can manually select a Bridget server, but if they select it, that's what is called a preferred Bridget server. But if they do that, if their DCs are unavailable, there will be no replication. Okay, and this is something we said. Two different sites are connected to each other or by using a site link. Okay, so let's go back to the whiteboard and then see here. This is the site link that you have here. That is the between DC03 and 04 that we have made. That's a site link that connects Mumbai and Bangalore. Okay. Let me pause for a while and create another site, and then we will talk more about the site link. Alright, so here we have another site added, that is Hyderabad, and we have two DC that is on that site, DC01 and 08. And here you can see, in this case, we have three different site links. There is one site link which connects Mumbai and Bangalore, another one between Bangalore and Hyderabad, and another one between Mumbai and Hyderabad. Okay, so there are a few things which you should understand about a site link, and that is going to be the site link has got a cost involved. Like say, I'm talking about the real world site link. Like whenever you buy a link between the sites, you go into the ISP, you will be charged, you will be actually having a cost involved there actually. So let's keep a cost to connect between the Mumbai and Bangalore as 40, and let's keep this as 100, and Bangalore and Hyderabad as again 40. Okay, basically let's keep it like cost. And let's see, the cost between these sites is this, and we can actually have a schedule as well mentioned in the site link. Like this link will be only used during this particular time. So you can actually mention a cost, you can mention schedule. Sometimes possibilities are there. You don't want the AD replication to happen during the heavy or peak hours or business hours, so that you can use that link for other purpose and not for AD replication. So there is a cost involved. Another one is the schedule that you can mention in each and every site link, and you can also mention the how often should you replicate, like say the interval to replicate. You can say either you can replicate it every 15 minutes, or you can say every 3 hours, and by default it is 180 minutes, so like every 3 hours let it replicate. So the data that you want to replicate across, you can actually mention the time when you want to replicate. You want to mention the interval, how often you should replicate, and you can mention the cost involved here. Okay, let's talk this way. Schedule is not an issue at this point, and interval is not an issue at this point. Let's say you have mentioned that you can replicate at any time, like 24/7, using all the 3 links. Okay, then in that case, the usage of a site link, it depends on the cost involved. Active Directory always try to use a site link which is having the least cost involved. What do you mean by that? Suppose say Mumbai have to send data to Hyderabad. There are 2 ways to reach there. Either the DC03 can send the data to DC04, and then DC04 basically can send data to Bangalore and Bangalore to Hyderabad, or else it can send directly to Hyderabad. That's the 2 way. But if you look at the cost involved, if it goes via Bangalore, it is only costing 80 rather than 100. So it will always try to use via Bangalore rather than sending it directly, because that is having a less cost, provided that this schedule says it can send at that particular time. So this is something which you need to understand when you talk about this cost. Cost determines the priority of the site link. Lower the cost, it will be more chance that you're going to use that site link more than the other one. So if you don't want it's not just the cost involved. First of all, there are possibilities that it is not just because of the cost, but it's because of the heavy bandwidth usage. Let's say there is an application that is sitting in Bangalore and Mumbai, and there is a replication that happens between that application, and that is a business critical application, and you don't want anything else to interrupt that particular link. Then even though the site link is less costly, in order for the Active Directory to use that for a lower priority, what you can do is increase the cost that you have in that site link. Put it like 140. So unless even like say not rather than keeping it as 140, let's keep it like 240. What is the use actually keeping it as 240? Let's say if you keep this as 240, even if it goes via Hyderabad, it is still less for it to go that way. So that's one way you can actually make Active Directory to avoid using a particular site link, increase the cost that is involved in that site link, and that will try to eliminate or use that on a lower priority. Okay, so I think that makes a total sense for the site link. I think at least an idea about what is a site link, right? All right, and I said some time back that is the ISTG. What is an ISTG? A KCC running on a bridgehead server acts as an ISTG, right? So, and whenever a site link goes down, KCC is going to create a new site, and this KCC is going to run every 15 minutes and look for any change that is there in the network. And whenever there is any change, it's going to create a new topology. Okay, let's go back to the slide and then take it further. Okay, that's what we talked just now here. The KCC running on the bridgehead server will be acting as an ISTG, that is bridgehead server, and whenever a site link goes down, KCC creates a new site link. Whenever a site link goes down, KCC creates a new inter-site replication topology. What do you mean by that? Like say, suppose Mumbai to Bangalore site link is down, then there's no way to go to Bangalore straight using that link. So it has to go via Hyderabad. So there will be a new site topology, inter-site topology automatically created, and the KCC does it, and it runs every 15 minutes to check if there is any change. Okay, and there is 2 things more then. Let's go back to the whiteboard again. You can think about this way. Like, say if you see Bangalore, Mumbai, and Hyderabad, there is some data being transferred, all right? There is a data being transferred to each other. So which means there should be a transport protocol that is required, right? There should be a protocol that is going to transfer the data across. So we have two options here. One is either RPC over IP, or else use SMTP. We can probably review why we would use RPC over IP and why would you use SMTP in the first place, okay? So let's keep it like this. At the end, first of all, we're going to actually replicate data, okay? So we should actually understand what kind of data does RPC support and what kind of data does SMTP support. So when you talk about RPC over IP, it is going to support every type of data replication that Active Directory requires, okay? So there's no question about anything. But if you look at the SMTP, it cannot do a file replication. It can make, I mean, whenever you make a new user, those things will be replicated, but you can't make a file level replication. Let's say a group policy that you created, a logon script that you created, those things will not be replicated by an SMTP link, okay? So another thing is going to be whether this is going to be a synchronous connection and an asynchronous connection. If you're using RPC over IP, you're going to have a synchronous connection. What do you mean by synchronous connection? I'm sending a data from here all the way to here, okay? From DC03 to DC04. What happens is it sends the data and it reaches DC01, and when it reaches DC01, DC01 should acknowledge to DC03 saying that, oh, I received it. Then it will send the second part of it, okay? If it doesn't receive that, I got it, like I received it, acknowledgement from the other side, it will not go further. So which means you can use this for synchronous connection. And suppose, say this way, you send the data and reached on DC04, and it did send the acknowledgement, but because the link is not really reliable, the acknowledgement didn't reach here, right? There's one possibility. So he may think that I didn't get an acknowledgement. So in that case, RPC over IP is something that you would use if you have a very reliable connection. Or I'm not trying to say very reliable, because if you had a very reliable and highly available connection, you can say it is one site. But that it's going to be reliable, but not that it has a its speed won't be the same as the speed that you have within the site. But that whatever site link that you have, whatever speed that you have, it will be reliable at least. Okay. So that's one thing. So the RPC over IP is going to be, it supports every data type. It's going to be synchronous, and it is used if the connectivity is reliable. And the other thing is, if you are trying to replicate within the site, it is always RPC over IP. It doesn't use SMTP. You know why? Because RPC over IP is used when you have a reliable connection, and within the site, the definition itself says a collection of domain controllers which are well connected with a reliable connection, which means it's already there. So it's going to use RPC over IP. Okay. So SMTP is going to be asynchronous. It is not going to be bothered. It will just send the data. It reaches the other side. Okay. And it is used when you have an unreliable connection. This is the main difference what you can talk about if you see about the ways you can reach, like the transports that you use for AD replication. But there is one thing. if you look into the real world scenario, we don't find, or you may not find an AD replication site link created with SMTP because of the limitations which I said. It cannot replicate the file, first of all, and so there are possibilities that you have a lot of logon scripts and group policies and things like that. So in a real world, you can see it is being used by RPC over IP. And not only that, internet is getting much cheaper, and the connectivity is getting more reliable than how it was earlier. So you may find RPC over IP being used between the site, and you may find SMTP very less. Okay, so that's about the site link and the transports that are used with the site link. Let's go back to the slide. So I think, are we all good with the site links? Like site link, are we all good with the site protocol that is used for sending? Are we good with the replication, how the replication happens within the site, between the site, etc.? Okay. Okay, that's good. So now we can actually explore the Active Directory, but I'm pretty much thinking to come back to the slide at the very end. The reason is we have a session that is going on for installing Active Directory today. So we will install that, and then we will actually, once it is installed, we will walk through the AD replication practical, or we can say a small preview about the sites and services console and some of the commands that we can use. Okay, so let's skip this for a while right now, and then we'll come back to this. All right, so let me go back to the whiteboard. I'll probably share a new whiteboard. Let me pause for a while. Let me actually put in a picture to the whiteboard. All right, so that's the picture. We need to understand, we were talking about replication right now, right? So we are all aware of what is a site, what is a domain, what are the partitions of an AD database. Basically, I've only shown 3 partitions. There is an application partition as well. We can skip that at this point. What I need to actually talk about right now is replication doesn't mean that it replicates each and everything at every point of time. You can't say that 100% true. It depends on your configuration, first of all, okay? In this case, example, we have 2 domains, okay? That is, roadtomaster.com is one of the domain. Another one is beta.roadtomaster.com. That's the second domain. Okay, and we have 2 domain controller. That is DZ01 and 02 in roadtomaster.com, and 1 domain controller in DZ03 in beta.roadtomaster.com. Okay. What is actually happening here is, within the same domain, that is between the DZ01 and DZ02, you can see that all the 3 partitions of an AD database is replicating to one another. Schema partitions are replicated, config partition is replicated, domain partition is also replicated. But if you see here on DZ03, it doesn't have the domain partitions being replicated each other. Okay, so which means domain partition is not replicated between the domains. I think that makes a lot clearer if I make that as a sentence. So if you have 2 domains, domain partitions are not replicated between each other, which means you create a user in roadtomaster.com, it will stay in roadtomaster.com domain. It will not reach to the other domain, beta or roadtomaster.com. I think that makes 100% sense, right? Because if you create a user in one domain, it should stay in that domain. It should not go to the other domain, right? So That's the basic thing you need to understand. How the replication happens. Right now, if you look at this, you will say, like, say if DC01 wants to query any user that is in roadtomaster.com domain, it has to go and ask the DC01 or DC02, right? If you look at this diagram, because DC03 doesn't have the domain information of the other one, right? It would have been the case until Microsoft made an alternate for that. It doesn't mean that the alternate doesn't mean that the domain partition is going to replicate at that point, but there is a way by which DC03 can still come to know what all users or what all data is there in roadtomaster.com. Okay, so we'll talk about that in some time, but I want to actually make sure that you understand that domain partition is not replicated between different domains. Okay. So there is one thing which I want to say is basically when I said about that is let's talk about what is a what is basically a domain controller. What is a domain controller? It's a server which has got AD installed. As simple as that. Okay. So I think everybody know what is a port number, right? Why do you need a port number? Let's keep it like this. DC01 has got two components. One is it is a domain controller because it has got AD installed. Another one is it is also a web server. Let's think about this way. It is not a recommended option. Let's say that's your web server as well. Okay. So if somebody or a client connects to DC01, how does the server know that it requires to return back the Active Directory thing, or whether it should actually return back a website? That is mentioned by the port number. So what it's actually doing? When it comes to DC01, it actually asks an LDAP port number that is 389. So whenever a communication happens on a 389 port number, it assumes that it is for Active Directory and tries to read the LDAP connection. Okay? All right? So I just talked about one thing that, you know, what if beta.roadtomaster.com wants to know or query a user about a user that is there in the roadtomaster.com. See, the DC03 has to go all the way up to DC02 and fetch the data at this point, right? If you look at that, yep. Suppose look at this way. If you look into this diagram right now, let's actually think about this way. This is one site. This is another site. Okay? Now what? It is going to go with a site link, right? If beta.roadtomaster.com wants to know something about the roadtomaster.com, it has to go via site link, right? Because it's between the sites. Now that's not going to be fast, right? Your site link might be slow, so you might get the response much slower, right? So what it did, the solution what Microsoft gave is actually this: global catalog server. What is a global catalog server? Global catalog server is a server that contains a partial representation of every object in the other domain in the same forest. Okay? Okay? We can actually call global catalog as a GC, just like DC for domain controller. Let's talk about that as a DC. Let's say here DC02 is a GC, what happens then? Apart from this particular partition, it actually gets one more extra information, which will be the information from, like a partial information. It's not going to have everything, but the partial information about the objects that is there in this domain. Okay? And the Microsoft says in one site you should have minimum 1 GC. Okay? Every site should need 1 GC minimum, so that you don't need to use the site link and go around and then look for that, right? Suppose, say, you are actually trying to do this way. It's not just a user. Look at this as a Exchange server. He's trying to actually understand if there is an email address named something something, if that user is present, if that user exists. Okay? Suppose, say, you want to, if the Exchange server wants to confirm that user01 at domain.com is available, if there is a user like that, it is not a fake user. What it does, the user can either be present in roadtomaster.com or beta.roadtomaster.com, right? It can be on either of the domain. So what do you think? The Exchange should go to both the domain controllers, like DC02 as well as DC03, and ask if that user is there? No, that's it. Yeah. It is rather going to ask a global catalog server and ask him, hey, can you validate whether this user is available in the forest? Okay? Because global catalog server is going to have a searchable partial representation of every object in every domain in that particular multi-domain AD forest. Okay? So now a DC is a GC as well, right? Now that DC, how will a domain controller come to know whether the communication is asked for a domain controller or whether it is for a global catalog? Again, the last thing, how did the DC01 came to know whether the request is for web server and request is for DC? Port number, right? So the port number that is used for DC is different, and if you want to query a global catalog related details, it will be different. So global catalog communication happens over an LDAP port that is 3268, and domain controller, it is 389. Okay, these are the two ports which is quite important. So if the communication happens over 389, what it is asking for? Is it asking for a global catalog? Right? No, it is not. It is asking for domain controller. 389 is domain controller, and if it is actually asking on a 3268, that's when global catalog comes in picture. Okay? Alright, so let's go back to the slides. So this is what we just spoke about. Domain controller, server which has got Active Directory installed, and it uses LDAP port number 389. And global catalog is a domain controller. Okay, did you see that? Global catalog is a domain controller, because yes, it was a domain controller, right? If you look into if you remember the diagram, it was an extra functionality which came to the existing server. So it is already a domain controller. So a global catalog is a domain controller, but a domain controller is not always a global catalog, right? Okay. So global catalog is a domain controller which is going to contain a searchable partial representation of every object in every domain in a multi-domain Active Directory forest. And it is going to use a non-standard LDAP port that is 3268. It's not a standard port. Standard port for LDAP is what is used by a DC, right? 389. So when it communicates over 3268, that's a global catalog. Okay, so now that you know what is a replication, we already knew what is an LDAP. We already know what is a database layer. We already know what is an extensible storage engine. We can talk about what is a DSA, what is SAM, what is replication. We already know replication again, but let's look into the AD database layer again, okay? And complete that diagram first of all. We'll keep this diagram intact so I can explain you the diagram on. Okay. The very first thing, what is the SE? It's the jet engine, right? And what is the database layer? It's the partitions that you have in the database. Schema partitions, config partitions, domain partitions, application partitions. Yep, 4 partitions, definitely. So if you want to actually know that again, it's something that you need to review what happened in the last session. We talked about all these partitions, what they do, and all sort of things. And we just now said about the replication as well. Which is the partitions which is not replicated between the domain? Which partition doesn't replicate between the domain? All right, that's good. Yep, domain partition doesn't replicate between domain. Every other partition does. Okay. Now, that's about the database layer. On top of that, there is a core directory service agent. What is that? This is a component that is going to run on every domain controller, and that is going to be providing the interface for the services and the processes that it is or it needs to it is basically the interface for every query that you're doing. Okay, every process that needs connection to an AD database, that is the interface. Okay, it's basically the agent to which everything communicates. Let's say if Active Directory wants or if Exchange wants to know something, this is the agent to which it will communicate and get the details. So this is the interface through which the services and processes are going to gain access to directory database. Okay, all good? I think it's fairly straightforward thing. Okay, all right, that's good. And what about what you see on the top? I think LDAP is something you already know, right? It's a interface by which you can do an LDAP query, right? You can actually there is actually multiple LDAPs, there is versions of LDAP available, and you can actually either use LDAP version 2 or version 3 ways of communicating to an Active Directory server. And most of the LDAP queries are going to be the latest anyway. Okay. What about the replication layer? What it is actually that? It is the replication management interface, right? It's very simple to understand, right? Now, I think something that is new that you didn't come across until now is SAM, right? What is a SAM? Security Accounts Manager. What does it do? So we need to go back to a situation when we didn't have AD set up. When we didn't have AD, what was the condition? What was the client? What was that systems running? They were all NT, Windows NT, NT 4.0 or something like that. What if you still have a client running on NT? Because NT is going to communicate with something which is not AD. It is going to still communicate with an NT PDC, right? An NT PDC, or a primary domain controller that is running on NT, is not running Active Directory. It is running SAM, Security Accounts Manager. So what is a SAM? SAM is a proprietary interface of Microsoft for connecting to DSA. What is DSA? Agent that is required to service any request that is to the database of Active Directory, right? Now, suppose say you're actually trying to communicate with somebody. Let's say you are trying to communicate with a person. You can only communicate if you know the language that person understands, right? Right? Make sense? So what if you don't know the language? So you need a person who can translate it, right? If you need a person who can translate something from your language to a language that ADs understand. That is what SAM is doing. SAM is doing. It is going to connect an NT 4.0 client to Active Directory database. Okay? Perfect? All good? So are we all good with the complete AD database layer right now? We are 100% fine with ESE database layer, are good with the DSA, good with replication layer, good with the LDAP part of it, good with the SAM, right? All good? Any questions so far on that? Perfect. So let's move ahead. So we're going to actually talk about a few things. That is actually, we already talked about this. Let's keep moving. Okay. If you look at an Active Directory, first of all, you came to know a lot of things right now, right? There are a many components involved in Active Directory, right? So the Active Directory components can be divided into two components. First of all, one is logical component, another one is a physical component. What is a logical component? What do you mean by logic? Something that only exists in theory, or something that you can't touch, basically. Yeah, you can't really feel, but it does work. That is what is logic. But what is physical? Physical is something that you can see, feel, you can touch, basically, right? That's what is physical. So what is logical component? Logical component is domain, tree, forest, organizational unit, objects that you see there, global catalog. Global catalog, what is a global catalog? Global catalog is that extra partial partition that you are getting there, right? You can't touch it anyway. And group policy, right? Those are all logical components. But what is a physical component? The domain controller. Domain controller is a server, right? You can see a server, right? It's a computer. And site. What is a site? Site, Mumbai, Bangalore, these are all physical locations, right? What is a site link? It's a wire that connects between the sites, right? It's actually a wire that connects them. It can be a fiber channel or whatever it is, whatever technology it is, but it is a physical connection between the sites. So those are the physical components. The other ones which we mentioned on the top is the logical component. Okay? All good there? So let's move on. Let's talk about two things. One is multi-master and another one is single master. What do you mean by multi-master replication? Let's go back to the whiteboard again. We'll actually share the other one rather. Okay. We have 3 sites here, right? In Active Directory, if you make a change in DC02, right? The change is replicated to every domain controller after quite some time, right? So, which means you can edit that particular user sitting in DC05, right? Because the change is already made. That type of replication is called multi-master replication, which means even after the replication, any member that is participating in the replication can do changes to that. Okay? If it is a single master, which means it will be replicated, definitely. Each will have the data, but only the master one master can make the change, okay, can edit or can add. So where do you find single master? Single master was the way of dealing at the point of NT, Windows NT, when we had a BDC, PDC concept, like Windows NT used to use that way. But doesn't mean that Active Directory is completely multi-mastered. There are some components of Active Directory which is single mastered, okay? And there is a reason for that, okay? Let's see this way. You have DC02 and DC05. There is a particular object in both the one, and an administrator is trying to edit DC02 and DC05 at the same time, okay? Which change will take effect? Which change will be taken into effect? Because you changed it in the same time, right? Who is going to decide which will be kept and which will not be? It's not going to be a big deal for an object, okay? Like say, there could be a slight change, even if it is actually changed in few milliseconds. The one that is actually completed latest will be changed, but one that is changed late will not be used. But let's say this way. There are few things, let's talk about like this. You have an AD domain, okay, called roadtomaster.com. We can probably go with that diagram and then talk about this. Let's say you have two domains, okay? Or let's go talk about one scenario where you only have one domain, like roadtomaster.com. You are yet to make the second domain, okay? Two administrators thought, okay, let's create the second domain controller. And what it is actually doing, two administrators just logged into another server, and then two different servers, and one administrator started the procedure of creating an extra domain called beta.roadtomaster.com, and at this after some time there is another person who is trying to again create a beta.roadtomaster.com, which means you find duplicated domains, right? You can't have that, right? You can only have the domain name used by like you can't have duplicate domain names, right? Then it's going to be confusing. So there should be somebody who is regulating and saying that, hey, this domain name is already in use, you should use another one. If you are trying to promote, you should use another domain name. So those things are all which are single mastered, okay? There are few things in Active Directory which are maintained single mastered to maintain the functionality of Active Directory, so that there are no trouble with the Active Directory in manipulating the changes, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about right now. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, so that's what is multi-mastered, single mastered. And what we have, we're going to talk about is FSMO role, okay? We'll actually take a small break. We'll come back in about like 10-15 minutes. In the meanwhile, we can actually pause the video and we'll resume it once we are back. So let's be back in like 15 minutes, and I'll call out and then we'll start back. Okay, probably can take a small tea break or something like that. Alright, so let's go back to where we stopped. That is, we were talking about the FSMO roles, and then a small break. I had a discussion. I think Priyanka made a good point that when you look at the logical components, does the object come under the logical component? It really depends on what object you're looking for. Like you're looking at a group is not something that you can touch. But if you're looking at a user object, yeah, definitely you can see a person. I mean, if you look at printer, you can touch them. So it depends on what it is, first of all. Okay. So in most of the case, it is quite a lot possible that it is most of the object depends on what object you are referring to. So it can be either logical or else physical. Okay. So we'll actually go ahead with the FSMO roles and see from there. Alright, so I think we probably have a fair amount of understanding on what is a multi-master replication and what is a single master replication by now. So we are going to talk about a few things which are flexible single master operations role. Single master operations means only one domain controller, either in the same domain or in the forest, will have that function. Flexible because you can choose any domain controller you want and assign that role. It's true that Microsoft automatically choose the FSMO roles or FSMO roles. It is automatically assigned when you install it, but you do have an option to move it across to anybody else or any other domain controller if you wish to. Okay. So let's talk about the very first one, that is schema master role. Okay. What is a schema master role? What is basically a schema? Schema decides what all objects you can make and how you can make it, and what all attributes you can find in each object. So if you want to make any change to the schema, or you want to add a new type of object, the schema update should happen on a domain controller which holds the schema master role. Okay? So once the schema is updated on the schema master role, it will be replicated to the other domain controllers. Okay, and if you want to actually do it in a forest, first of all you should have access to the schema master role. You should be a schema administrator. There is a group named schema administrator. You should be a part of the schema admin. That's the name that is mentioned in the AD. Schema admin, you should be a part of that group, or else you should be an enterprise administrator to make those changes. Okay. And you can see that there will be only one schema master role in the whole forest. Even if you have 10 domain, 100 domain, or 1000 domain controllers, there will be only one domain controller or one domain controller in the entire forest who will have the schema master role. So one schema master for the whole forest. Okay. So there is one thing which you need to understand. Whenever you are trying to install Exchange, you should actually update the Active Directory schema for the first part, because Exchange is going to add a mailbox, right? That's a new type which AD doesn't understand. So you should have connectivity to schema master role, and you should have the rights to access the schema. Alright, so that's it. And the second one is domain naming master role. Okay, it is what actually controls the addition and removal of domain in a forest. Okay, which means whenever you add a new domain, it actually confirms if the name is already in use in the forest. So again, this is the same as schema master role. It can be only one in the whole forest. Okay. And let's talk about the next one, and that is infrastructure master role. I think we talked about this in the last part when we were talking about object. Whenever you create an object, it assigns a GUID, right? What is a GUID? It is a security identifier, right? SID, which gets by every object that it makes. So, and I also said a GUID will be unique. There will be no two objects with the same GUID. So how does it track? Basically this way, like say, how does it reference an object when it is actually moving across the domain? Okay. So when an object in one domain is referenced by an object in another domain, it is represented by the SID which it gets assigned and the distinguished name of the object being referenced. So the infrastructure master role responsibility is to update the object SID and the distinguished name in the cross-domain reference. Okay. Whenever you are talking about either it is represented by a DN, distinguished name, or else it is represented by a SID. So the infrastructure master role is going to do the updating the object SID and the distinguished name across the domain. Okay? And across the forest, okay, with inside the forest, and it is going to be like, say, if you want to actually within the forest, the inside the forest, the SID and the DN is basically updated, and that is done by the infrastructure master role. And there can be only one domain controller in one domain, or in one domain controller in each domain. If you have two domains, then you will have two infrastructure master role. If you have only one domain, you will have only one. If you have 10, you will have 10 infrastructure master role. Okay? You will have one on each domain. There should be one more thing. You know, in every domain you have something called global catalog server, right? So you need to understand one thing, that infrastructure master role should not be on a domain controller that is a global catalog server. The reason is this way. What it is actually doing, infrastructure master role, it updates the SID and the distinguished name of the other domain, right? But a global catalog already has an update about every object in the domain, right? I mean, in the forest. So if an infrastructure master role is running on a global catalog server, it will stop updating it, because it doesn't know what all things it doesn't hold, right? Because it contains a partial information of every object that you have in the forest. So it really doesn't know what it is not there in that domain and what is not there in the other domain. Basically, it holds a copy of everything. So it feels like everything is there in this domain, right? Everything is there with me. So it is not going to update it, right? And there is also one other reason why it should not be there, okay? Another reason is this way. Whenever an across domain reference happens, the SID is confirmed with, like, it will actually confirm with the global catalog server and confirm about the group membership. Suppose, like, say you are a part of a group that is on another domain, okay? And whenever you are trying to log in, it actually wants to make sure that your group membership is actually confirmed. How does it do that? It confirms a group membership via global catalog server, okay? It will ask a global catalog at, hey, this guy is a member of this particular group. So is it actually valid, or is he not a part of a group? Now the point is, if himself is a global catalog, this particular check is going to happen with the same server, right? It is actually this way. You are writing the exam. You are the student. You are the one who is correcting the exam paper. And you are the one who is going to go back and give the marks to yourself. Will that make any sense as a... I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? So the infrastructure master role should not be on a global catalog for two reasons. One is, global catalog really doesn't know what objects that it doesn't contain, because it contains a copy of every object, although it only has a partial update of the objects that it doesn't hold, but it still has every data. I mean, it does contain the details of every object, right? And the other reason is confirmation happens with a global catalog, and if it is the same server, it doesn't make sense. Okay? All good? Perfect. So let's go to the next part, that is relative identifier. I said about the infrastructure master role does like it is going to update the SID and the distinguished name in a cross-domain basis, and the SID is always unique. Okay, how does it become always unique? That is because there is a role which is called relative identifier master role, who is responsible for processing the read pull request from all domain controller, which means suppose you want to create a user. Okay, the SID is going to get assigned by consulting another person, that is a read master role, and the read master role is going to give you an ID, and that is going to be unique because he knows what all IDs are already used, right? But there is, look at this way, whenever you create a user, you go to RID and ask for a SID. To make this process more efficient, what it actually does is the read master role assigns a pool of ID, like say every domain controller, let's say this particular, you have this domain controller 1 and domain controller 2. What the read master role does is it actually gives 10 SID or a pool of SID. It gives a collection of SID. Like say if you think 1 to 20 given to DC01, and then 21 to like a 40 is given to DC02. So whenever a user is created in DC01, it will be using those range which is assigned to it, and whenever it is actually created on DC02, it uses the range that is assigned to DC02. Now what happens if the range is completed? Then it goes to read master role and asks for the next pool. Okay, that way it doesn't need to go to read every time the user is created. It gives a pool of ID. All good? And you should say in every domain there will be only one read master role. Okay? Perfect. So that's about the read master role. Let's go back to the next role, and that is PDC emulator role. Okay? What is a PDC emulator role? PDC means primary domain controller. Okay. I'll probably go back to this whiteboard and I'll show you a diagram to probably make you understand a bit more. Okay. Let's talk about this as this is a domain controller, and this is a domain controller. And this is a PDC, this is a BDC, and let's say this is an NT 4.0 domain controller, and this is an NT 4.0 domain controller. Why I'm showing NT is, earlier in NT I said the directory is not multi-mastered, it is single mastered, which means a read-write copy is only present in one part. Like say the PDC and BDC, like say you can only have one PDC, but you could have multiple BDCs. Like say if you want one more, you can add one more. But if you want to make changes, you always need to make sure that PDC is available. Okay? So suppose you have an NT 4.0 domain controller still in your environment. The problem with an NT was a BDC will only work if you have a PDC up and running. Okay? There should be a PDC in the network, then only a BDC will function. But there is no concept of a single master operations in terms of like object updates and all sort of things in AD, right? Every domain controllers are read-write. So there is no, this concept doesn't exist anymore. But what if you still have a BDC domain controller with you? So if it wants to communicate, it should communicate to an NT-PDC. What it is actually going to do is, this role is going to emulate himself as a PDC. What means it is going to show to an NT-PDC as if it is a NT 4.0 PDC server. So NT 4.0 BDC can still function. Okay? But there is one thing. Nowadays you don't find NT 4.0 servers running on any network because that's quite old server. So does that mean that a PDC emulator role doesn't have any other function? No, there are much more functions than that, and that is basically it's going to take care of multiple things. Whenever you change a password, okay, the changed password or the new password that you typed is going to be first replicated to a PDC emulator. Okay? And the other thing is, whenever you log in, suppose you gave a username and password, and you gave a wrong password, and you get an authentication failure update from, like, your password is wrong, or whatever update that you get from Active Directory. What happens is, whenever an incorrect password is typed, that is forwarded to a PDC emulator before it gives you a bad password failure message. Okay? It confirms in a PDC saying that, hey, did anybody change the password? If yes, it will confirm that whatever you typed just now is the new password. If yes, it will log you in. Otherwise, it will give you a bad password failure message. Okay? And there is another thing in Active Directory that if you try to log into an account multiple times with a bad password, your account will be locked out. What do you mean by lockout? You can't log in anymore. Okay? So the account lockout is processed by PDC emulator. Okay? Now, you have a lot of group policies. What is a group policy? Suppose you want to apply a set of rules or set of settings on a group of computers in the network. What you do is you create a group policy and apply to them, and all those computers that it applies will get that change. If you want to edit or create a group policy, it always makes those from a PDC emulator's sysvol share. Okay. You can configure not to use that as well, but normally if you don't customize it, PDC emulator is used at that point as well. Okay. And the last thing is something which I said. It functions like an NT 4.0 PDC, so that an NT 4.0 based servers or NT 4.0 based clients can communicate. Okay. Now let me make it like this. Okay. If you have an NT 4.0 client, okay. Do you remember this part? Let's go back to the diagram of the database layer. What is this SAM going to do here? If there is an NT 4.0 client who wants to communicate to AD, it works like a translator, right? It works like an interface for him. So if the client is just connected to a domain, doesn't mean that he needs a PDC emulator. But if that NT 4.0 is a domain controller as well, then that domain controller requires a PDC role up and running for it to function. Not if it is not a domain controller. If you have an NT 4.0 operating system running, it doesn't mean that it needs a PDC emulator. It only needs a PDC emulator if that is configured as a BDC, okay? Backup domain controller. Okay, let's go back to, so we are quite good with the FSMO roles. We can actually go ahead and then review that again. Like say, schema master role, what it does, updating schema. So when do you need that? when you update schema, like say installing Exchange. Okay, which means about one thing: if a schema master role is down, you are only going to come to know, or you only impact you're going to get is when you want to update a schema, right? And this is the reason that it is not a very highly critical thing, because you're not going to do a schema update every now and then. It will not be a daily process, first of all. And you're going to do a schema update with the proper planning. So a schema master role being down is not generally a high priority issue, because unless there is a ad hoc situation of updating a schema all of a sudden. But most of the case, it doesn't be that way. Okay. Domain naming master role. It is only when you are trying to add or remove domains, right? How often do you add or remove domains? I mean, once you create a topology, once you create an infrastructure, you really don't do addition and removal every now and then. So this is also again not a highly critical thing if it fails. Okay. But now, when it comes to the infrastructure master role, what it does a cross-domain object reference, right? So if this is down, you're going to have trouble, definitely, because you're not going to have a proper cross-domain object reference. And if that is not there, you do not have a proper communication that is happening between the domains, and that's not going to be good. You may find errors coming up. Okay? So this is definitely a component which is important. So if you say infrastructure master role is down, you should rather act on it as soon as possible. All right. And even there is actually one question: what if you don't have more than one domain? If you just have one domain, then really infrastructure master role doesn't have much to do, right? Because it does a cross-domain object reference. In that case, again, same story as a schema master role and domain naming master role. It can be if you're adding a new domain later, if this being down will create trouble. But if it is just one domain, you're not going to find any difference. Okay? Now, relative identifier. Relative identifier could have been a trouble if whenever if the condition is like this: whenever you're creating an object, it will ask an RID and look for a security identifier. But that's not the case, right? The read master role assigns a pool of ID, so which means even if the read master role is down, until the pool that is assigned to you is completed, you're not going to be requiring a read master role. So now the question is, how will you come to know how much is left in the domain controller? You really do not have that option, I mean, to see what is happening. So you do not have unless and until you really want to dig inside Microsoft Active Directory. So again, you need to do some sort of guesswork, like how many objects that you made. So rather than that, it's better not to do that. So if read master role is down, it's better to consider that as a critical component, even though there is a pool of IPs that are assigned. Okay, because once the pool is exhausted, then it will require a read whenever you want to create an object. But now there is one thing: what if the company is having a situation like, it doesn't add new things that often? It doesn't add new object. Like once it is created, it's just that no new users are added, no new computers are added. Then in that case, read master role is still not going to be affected, right? Even if that is down, because if a new object is created, it doesn't matter what it is, like a user, a computer, a group, or whatever it is. If a new object is created, that's when the read master role comes in picture. Okay? And the other thing is the PDC emulator role. What if the PDC is down? If the PDC is going to be down, there are a lot of things. I think I didn't talk about one thing about the PDC. There is a very important thing about PDC, that is time synchronization. Which I missed to say in the earlier thing, that is PDC emulator makes sure that every domain controller or every client that is communicating to that is actually having same time. This is actually one of the trouble that we have. If you look at your clock, you may find that your time is something else, my time is something else, even though you are in the same time zone or you're in the same city, because our clocks are not always in sync with each other. So PDC emulator is the one which confirms that every client computer that is connected to the domain and every domain controllers that is there in the network has got the same time. Okay, so time synchronization is done. If that is down, there is going to be a trouble. And there is one more thing. If you can try that if you want when you are actually joined to the domain. If your time that is there in your computer and the time that is there on the server doesn't match, like if there is a huge gap in the time, it is not going to let you log in because time is not same. Okay, so even you can get an issues login issues first of all, and password changes. There are possibilities that you may find account issues, like say account lockout issues or any sort of issues related to a password. Like say even if you wrote the right password, because the earlier changed password is not properly replicated across, you may be prompted for saying that you have a wrong password added. So possibilities are there. You may find some confusions going on. Okay. Again, that's only when you change the password. If you're using the same password that was earlier, again, there is no effect if the PDC emulator is down. Now, the other one is editing or creating group policies. Yeah, if you're not actually a company who makes group policy every now and then, again, you're not really bothered. But definitely, that will be come into effect when you have issues actually for basically creating a group policy. Another one is, suppose your company has got an NT 4.0 domain controller, then definitely this is going to bring that one down. So it is definitely going to be critical. But again, as I said, this is only a condition which will arise if you have an NT 4.0. If you don't have one, then you are not really bothered again. But one thing is really important, that is a time synchronization. As long as the clients are communicating to the domain controller, and if they are using the domain controllers to synchronize, the PDC emulator role should be up and running. Okay, so if you look at this, the most important things are going to be PDC. If they are down, like this, you should be having, or you should probably work on it as soon as possible. If it is a PDC emulator, or if it is a infrastructure master role, or if it is a RID master role, the other two can wait. That's fine. And there is one more thing. You found there are only 5. Yes, there are only 5 FSMO roles. Of these, 2 are forest-wide, 1 in each forest, and 3 are domain-wide. Which are the forest-wide? Forest-wide is schema master role and domain naming master role, and the domain-wide is going to be your other 3 roles, like infrastructure master role, then your RID master role, and PDC emulator. Okay, all good? And I've added a link which is going to be taking you to petri.co.il. You can get a fair amount of understanding on FSMO if you go through that. All right. All good. So very first thing you should understand, whenever you want to install Exchange, which is the FSMO role that should be up and running? Whenever you're trying to install Exchange, what do you do first? You update the schema. So which role is required? Schema master role. Yep, that's true. So that's one thing. Okay. Now there is something called a domain functional level and something called a forest functional level. Okay. What is actually is? Active Directory has got something called a functional level at both forest and the domain levels. That is going to determine which features of Active Directory should be available to you. Okay. So if you have a Windows 2000 native, it's basically basic Active Directory functionality. Almost every basic functionality will be there. Right from the day the Active Directory was built, those will be there. But if you convert that into a 2003, okay, that's when you get a lot of other options. Like say, you can rename a domain controller. So that gives you an answer. Earlier than a Windows Server 2003, a domain controller cannot be renamed. Okay, once you install Active Directory on a domain controller, you cannot rename it. So you should be I mean, that's old story, because Windows 2000, I'm pretty much sure it is no longer there in the networks. I mean, it is quite less. I mean, it is not no longer, but it will be very less. But you should be understanding that you can't change the computer name. Okay. Now, with Windows Server 2003 as the domain functional level, you get an extra thing, that is, it adds the last logon timestamp, which was not available earlier. You can't really say who logged in, I mean, and what time. So last logon timestamp for each and every users are there now. Now, there is another object, a new object called inet.org person object. What is this? This is an object which you use if you are trying to migrate from a third-party directory service. If you want to actually change or do a migration, that's when this will be used. This will be like a temporary object that you create or you make at that point. Okay. And constraint delegation is something which got added when you had a Windows Server 2003. What do you mean by constraint delegation? Let's go back to the whiteboard. I'll pause the recording for a while until I write something here. Alright, this is what I wrote actually. Probably this requires a bit of explanation. One is what you see on the other side, both sides is actually one is server 01 and server 02, and what you see in between is a firewall. And let's think this way. You have a server 02 running a database, and it is going to be very secure, that you only want the communication or connection to be enabled to the database from server 01. Okay? So if there is a user sitting in internet and wants to log into that database, the only option could be the user will log into server 01, and the server 01 will use that user's credential and log into the database. And that is what is called constraint delegation. You delegated server 01 to use the user 01's username and password and access the database and give back the details that the user 01 wanted. Okay? So is it all good? Perfect. So this is what is actually a constraint delegation is in a very simple manner. So if you want this functionality to be present, which is the functional level you should have? If you want this functionality, your domain functionality level should be Windows Server 2003. Okay? Alright, so then next one is Windows Server 2008. What do you mean by that? Windows Server 2008. If your domain functional level is Windows Server 2008, your sysvol share replication is going to be by using DFS. What is a sysvol? Let me actually go back to, I think probably this particular slide. No. Okay. Look at this diagram. You don't find any replication for the policies, right? We are actually talking about database right now. So, in every domain controller, you can actually create something called group policies. group policy objects. Okay, and this will be shared, or this will be stored in a folder named sysvol, and that every server will have a sysvol folder. I mean, every domain controller will have a sysvol folder. Okay, so whenever you create a GPO or a group policy object, it is saved in the sysvol folder. Let's say you created it from DC02. So in the DC02 sysvol, you save these group policy object related information. Okay, now this needs to be replicated, right? This needs to be replicated to all the DC01, DC02, and DC03. So in earlier days, we used to have something called NTFRS, NT File Replication Service, to do the replication. Okay, but this NTFRS was not that reliable. Sometimes we used to have trouble in the replication. So to make it more optimized, or to make it much better in terms of efficiency, we have a new way of replicating this sysvol folder from Windows Server 2008, and that is DFS. Okay, DFS is something which is a altogether different topic, which we need to talk if I start speaking about that. But you can think about this way: DFS is something which is better than an NTFRS in many ways. Okay, so DFS is used for replicating sysvol share. All right, and there is an advanced encryption system for the Kerberos. What is Kerberos? It is the authentication mechanism of AD. So you have an advanced encryption system available for that. And when you have Windows Server 2008, you don't just have the last logon details. You have more updates, like, you know, how many times did this user had a failed login attempt and all sort of things before it got logged in. Okay, now there is another thing called a fine-grained policy, or fine-grained password policy. Okay, what do you mean by fine-grained password policy? To understand that, you should understand one thing. Earlier in 2003 or 2000, you can only have one password policy for one domain. What do you mean by password policy? How many of you have logged into any service, like say Skype or something like that, and then when you type a password, it actually says your password is too weak, and then type something which has got a numerical, something which has got a uppercase, something which has got like a characters like at sign or something like that. Those are the policy. That's the policy. It is the set of rules which an administrator set. If somebody is putting a password, he can't put a simple password. It should be a complex password. Yeah, simple as that. So fine-grained password means you can create more than one policy for one domain. Earlier, if you create a policy, that is applied to every user in that domain. Now with a fine-grained password policy, you can have users in the same domain having different policies. Like say, you can say some users to have an easy password, some users to have a very difficult password based on what important work they are doing. Okay. So when it comes to Windows Server 2008 R2, you have an authentication mechanism assurance. What do you mean by that? Like whenever an user is authenticated, it adds more details, like the user was authenticated using a smart card, for example, or else you can say the user was authenticated using something like a biometric device or anything like that. Okay, there will be more details available, and there will be an automatic SPN management. And more about SPN, we need to talk more in details about SPN. We'll have these sessions going on when we talk about Active Directory in advanced level, but for now, you can say if you want an automatic SPN management, you need a Windows Server 2008 R2. Okay. Now, suppose you had an NT 4.0 domain earlier and you upgraded that to a Windows 2003 or 2000 at this point, then your level of domain will be automatically set to mixed or interim. Okay? Interim, if you are upgraded it. Mixed means you already have a domain controller that is still an NT 4.0 or a 4. Okay? So if you do not have any NT still running, then there's no reason to keep it in mixed. You can change those functional level. Okay. And there is one thing which you need to understand here. If you look at these functional level, 2000, 2003, you have a 2008, 2008 R2, mixed. Mixed is the very first level, first of all. It actually starts with mixed. There is one thing we need to understand. If you raise your functional level from 2003 to 2008, you can no longer go backwards. Okay? So you have to be careful when you actually raise it. You need to make sure that there is no, you can never go back. It's a process with no rollback. Okay? Now, the same like in domain functional level, you have something called forest functional level. What do you mean by forest functional level? You have the same way, like a Windows 2000 native to start with. It's basically a basic Active Directory features. And you have something called a Windows Server 2003 functional level. And that's where you had a forest level trust. You can trust two different forests. Like say a user sitting in forest A can log into a resource that is in forest 2 as long as they trust each other. So that forest trust is possible if you have a forest level of Windows Server 2003. You can do a renaming of domains if you have a Windows Server 2003 forest level. So do you know one thing? Suppose you added a domain. You didn't have an option to rename it earlier, but it is possible if you have a forest functional level that is running on 2003. Okay? There are a lot of improvements in the knowledge consistency checker, and now you can actually create an object with an expiry date. Let's say if you create an object, you can say that object to stay there for these many amount of time. After that, it will automatically go up. Okay? Now, in this way, you can even actually have an option to convert an inet.org person to user. What is an inet.org person? I already told that. It is actually used if you're trying to import or export users from any third-party directory system or directory service to Active Directory. Okay? Or as if you want to actually, basically it is actually used when you're trying to migrate from a third-party option. Okay? And this is, if you should have a minimum Windows Server 2003 functional level if you want to create a read-only domain controller. I said in the earlier stage that Active Directory is a multi-master domain replication, which means once the data is replicated, any person participating in the replication can do edits, right? It can edit, it can read. So if you have a read-only domain controller, that particular domain controller is not going to have a write access to those what it actually has got via replication. It can just read it. Okay? You can only deploy one if your forest function level is 2003 minimum. Okay? Now, there is one more thing about the schema updates. That is, if you update a schema, it is having the same thing as a forest function level or domain function level. You can never roll back. Once a schema is updated, you cannot roll back, right? But in 2003, you have an option to deactivate something which you already made. Like say, you made a change. You can't roll back definitely, but you have an option to deactivate if you don't want that. Okay? You can't delete them, but you can deactivate it. So that's more or less about the different functional levels I can talk about. But Windows Server 2008 is another functional level that is there, and there is a Windows Server 2012 as well. What I actually wanted to actually update you is basically there are functional levels. These functional levels determine what all functions are available to the domain controller. And as I said, to understand more about a functional level, you should actually have a better understanding on Active Directory on a more advanced level, each and every components of Active Directory. But right now, I should let you know that what is a functional level and why it is important, and what is a forest functional level. Why is it important? I didn't cover every functional level. There are a few functional levels still, like in 2012 and 2008 in the forest, even actually in the domain level. But my basic requirement was to actually give you an understanding on what is a functional level. Okay. So we can have probably a discussion. Let's go on and we can install an Active Directory, and then we can actually complete the session as of now. And this particular session, whatever we had today or whatever we had last time, is just to give you an overview of Active Directory, what it is. And those who doesn't have any idea about Active Directory, these just gives them an idea. But it doesn't mean that Active Directory sessions are over. This is just a basic session. If you wish to understand more, you should actually learn more about Active Directory. There are a lot of Microsoft Press book available, which you probably can go through and buy, and then there are a lot of blogs available. And either you can actually come back to Road to Master and attend another session, which might be scheduled much sooner, and probably or listen to a recorded session of an advanced level Active Directory sessions. But right now we're going to actually close off these by installing an Active Directory. So let me actually get the labs ready, and probably we can take a break, like say about 15 minutes, and by then we should have the labs up and running, and then we can proceed further on that. All right. I just want to actually have one thing here before we go on a break. I just want to say, are we all good with the basic understanding on Active Directory? Did we understood about the Active Directory as such? I'm not saying you might know to design an Active Directory, or you might know to do everything in Active Directory, but at least you should have an awareness of Active Directory. Because our main thing is, this is for those who want to learn the products such as Exchange or other products which actually requires an Active Directory, but not for administrator who are going to be an Active Directory administrator as a main thing, but more or less going to be those who are actually going to work on other supporting applications. Okay. So we'll come back in 15 minutes once the systems are up and running, and then we'll continue from there. Okay, so let's start with the installation of Active Directory domain services. And there is one thing which I want to talk is actually whenever somebody says Active Directory, it is actually Active Directory domain services. Okay, so don't get confused with if there is anything which says Active Directory domain services. That is actually what we normally call as Active Directory. But there are more than Active Directory domain services in Active Directory, like certificate service, federation service, so on and so forth. So because there are more flavors of Active Directory available nowadays, we try to make it just more specific. So I can say like this: I'm going to install Active Directory domain services right now. You can see I'm actually on a server which is called Server 1, and we can actually install one. We need to go to the Server Manager. I just clicked on the Server Manager, and once it fires up, we need to click on the local server, and we can go to manage and say add role and features. And it opens up an add role and features wizard. That's where we need to select the options and get the installations done. So we'll click next, and I'm going to select role-based or feature-based installation. And I would say select a user from the server pool, and then I'm selecting server 1, but that's where I am right now. Okay, I'm logged into that system. And then I'll click next, and then I will say Active Directory Domain Services. Immediately it said if you're installing Active Directory Domain Services, it should add the following features as well, like some of the tools. So I said that's fine, let's add the features. And then I will click next. And it requires .NET 4.5. It is already installed, and that should not be an issue. So we'll go ahead, and then this is a review which you can do. What are you going to do? And you have an option here which says restart the destination server automatically if required. So I'm going to check that, and then I'll click install here, and that's going to go through the process of the installation, and that's going to take some time, and probably will wait for some time. Like say it may take like 10 minutes or so to complete the this particular installation. And there is one thing that you can see here is you can see a close button here when you're installing it, which means you can really do that. We can actually close it. It really doesn't mean that you cancel the process. You can see on the notification option here which says an installation is going on. So that is not actually completed. It is still going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and then we'll start back once this complete. Oh, that's good. It actually completed the installation, but it is still not a domain controller. It only installed the binaries. What you should do is you can actually go in here, and then it opens up the same window where we were, which we closed some time back. All right. It's still not actually completed. It is still waiting for the last final stages. So let's give it like 2 minutes. I'm going to pause the video, and then I'm going to start it back. Okay. All right, let's go back here. Okay, this is what I was talking about. The you get another one which says post deployment configurations, and that's where it says promote this domain server to a domain controller. So let's go ahead and then click on that. Okay, we get multiple selections here, and this one is actually going to ask you a few things. Are you going to add a new domain to an existing forest, or are you going to add a new forest altogether? Let's talk in this way. This is going to be the very first domain controller that we have, and we are going to actually create an Active Directory. So what is the root domain that you want to keep? Like say, what is a root domain? It's the very first domain that you're going to install in a forest. So I'm going to keep it as root2 master.com, and click next. And what is it doing? It is actually going to search in the network and see if this name is in use or so, and it's going to come back to me with an option if it is already used. Let's give it like 2 minutes. All right, there is no problems with the name, and this is what we were talking some time back. What is the domain functional level and what is the forest functional level you want to actually set. You have to give it some time because it's still processing in the backend. Okay, that's good. So you get a proper selection right now. Okay, you can see multiple forest functional levels like in 2003, 2008, 2008 R2, 2012. There is few things which you need to understand here. If I select 2003 here, I still have all the functional levels available for domain. But if I select 2008, I can no longer see 2003 here. The reason is you cannot have a domain functional level that is lower than the forest functional level. Okay, so which means suppose you are actually trying to update or raise the forest functional level. It's always good if you actually want to make sure that you can update the domain functional level first and then update the forest functional level second. That's fine. But the like say if I have a I had a forest functional level here that is 2003, and suppose the domain functional was as well as 2003. If I raise the forest functional level to 2008, it is automatically going to raise your domain functional level as well. Okay, so that's one thing you have to be aware of. Either you have to raise the domain functional level first and then raise the forest functional level. That's the recommended option. But as I said, if you are trying to do that, you need to understand one thing, that it is going to update your domain functional level as well, even if you try to raise your forest functional level. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to keep it to Windows Server 2008. I don't have any specific reason to keep it, but I'm just selecting that. And probably I would say I want to make use of the DFS mode of replication for the sysvol. Okay, and I'm going to install DNS as well on this particular system. And this is this is another thing which you need to understand. The very first domain controller that you're going to install automatically becomes a global catalog. You can see here I have no option to uncheck this. So the very first domain controller that you install on a forest or on a domain, or the very first domain controller that you install in a site. So any of the three can be true. Very first domain controller in the forest, very first domain controller in the domain, very first domain controller in the site is automatically going to be a global catalog server as well. Okay, let me quickly put in the password for this. All right, and then I'll click next. And this is a warning message which you can ignore, and then I can actually show, and then I can probably explain you why you can ignore this. What is it actually saying? A delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because authoritative parent zone cannot be found, which means it could not find any DNS server in the network which has the roadtomaster.com zone already there, which will not be there because I'm sure I don't have any other DNS server in the network right now which has got the roadtomaster.com domain. So I'm fine with it. I'm going to go with that because if you read this, you can actually see one more thing here. You can actually, if you are integrating an existing DNS infrastructure, you should manually integrate or manually create a delegation to this DNS server in the parent zone. But there is another thing. Otherwise, no action required. So otherwise, I'm in the otherwise section. I don't have a DNS, so I don't need anything. All right. So click next, and then it is actually verifying the NetBIOS name to the domain which I made, and then it's going to come back to me the name. What it is going to do is it is going to remove the .com from at the end and then give a name which is going to be Oh yeah, root to master, because my DNS name was .tomaster.com and my NetBIOS name is going to be root to master. And then click next. Alright, this is, I think you probably need to review the ACID property of a database section. I said an Active Directory takes care of those by making sure that the data is saved on a log file as well as the database file. And I talked about the sysvol some time back. It's the shared folder which will have the policies, logon scripts, etc. So where do you want to keep these files? That's what it is asking. So I'm fine with the default location. If you want to change it, you can change it. So if somebody asks you what is the default location for your AD database, it is C Windows NTDS. Okay, C, which means your system drive, and NTDS. So let's go to and click next. So it's actually going to give me a review of whatever I said. I give the configuration as this is going to be the first Active Directory domain controller in a new forest, and the name is going to be roottomaster.com, and this will be also the name of the forest, which means one thing is very clear: the name of the forest is equal to the name of the very first domain that you install in that forest. Okay. Suppose somebody asks you a question like, say, I have a forest with roottomaster.com and beta.roottomaster.com, abc.com, all these are the three domains which are there in that particular forest. Somebody asks you, what is the name of the forest? Then your probably answer is going to be, the name of the forest can be either roottomaster.com or abc.com, but depends which one was installed first. So that should be the answer. If they say, okay, I installed first abc.com, then you should say, okay, your forest name is abc.com. Okay, so that's it, and then we'll go ahead and then say next. So the earlier question, people may confuse with multiple domains, like say they may ask you like 10, 15 domain names, and then the answer is always the same. Which one did you install first? So it doesn't matter how many you have. And it's going to actually go ahead and install it. And if you remember, we actually checked the box to reboot it as well. So it is going to go with the process of the installation, and it will create a domain controller, and it will reboot it by itself, and it will come back. So I'm going to pause the recording again, and then we'll resume once the setup is done. All right, I just want to actually show you one more thing before I click install. There are a few things which it actually passed the prerequisite test. So it really did not have any trouble. But it is actually saying that it is actually allow cryptography arithmetic algorithm compatible with this. I mean, it's basically a cryptography which is compatible with an NT 4.0. You really do not need it unless you have a system which requires an NT 4.0. So you can actually if you want to actually make sure you don't want that, you can do that. But right now when you install it, it allows it. That's what it is saying. And the other thing is the delegation, which we already read some time back, and nothing else is there. So it's all good, and we're good to go ahead and then click install. And you can see the progress here. What is it doing? It's actually in the starting state, and once it completes, it will reboot the server, and then we can log in back with a credential for the Active Directory. Okay, now another thing is, somebody might be asking me, I didn't give a username and password, so what should be the username and password I should use when I log in? It is going to be like this. When you are actually updating this to a domain controller, this might be a system with a local username and password. So what is it going to do? This is going to actually make a username for you as per the username which you already have. Like say, suppose you're logged in with administrator. That administrator password will still work in the next logon, okay? Which I will show you right now. Like once this is rebooted, before even I log in, I'll make sure that the recording will be started back. All right, and in my case, you can see that it is joining the server from the domain contester.com because this particular system was a member server. It was a part of a contester.com domain earlier. So it actually removed it and made it as a standalone system, and then goes on with the process of installing the AD and creating this as a domain controller. All right, so I'll pause the video and then I'll start back once the system is back online. All right, the system is installed and it is back online. So what I should be doing is I can go to this other user option here, and I'm probably going to say this should be fine with Roadmaster, and I'll say administrator. That was the username which I had in the earlier logon. And let me make it this way. If you, most of the cases when you install it, this is the screen that you get in the beginning. Like say, it'll ask you for a username and password. So put that and put the password which you had in the earlier logon. And I just enter that, and then I'm going to click enter. And then because you just got added to the Active Directory, it is asking you to change the password, and it'll actually ask you to put a new one, and then you just add up the new one, and that should be it. And changing the password has been changed. And you can see that system has come back online, and let me just increase the size of the taskbar. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Server Manager. And if I go to Tools, I can see all these Active Directory admin tools. Like say, if I go to Active Directory users and computers, and this is where I see the Active Directory. This is what I talked about, the hierarchical database in the very first stage. Like say, inside dirtmaster.com, you have users. Inside the users, you have the users listed here. And if I want to create a user, I'll right-click, and I'll create a new, and I'll create a user. I can create any other objects as well. There are, like say if I create a user, and then it is going to ask me for what is the name. I'll keep my name, and I'll say my last name, and what should be the user logon. I'm fine with my first name, and then I'll say next, and I'll keep a password. And it's up to you whether you want to select this. If it is selected, you just saw a prompt earlier when I logged in, like it'll, the user can log in with the password which you mentioned here. But immediately, once he puts that password, he will be asked to put a new password. That's something that you should use if you're trying to create a new user, and the user should be good to set his own password. Okay, and I'm fine with this. And I will click Finish. And that user is created. So if I go to this or double click that user, I get too many options here. And these, going through all these things is something that we should be doing if there is a session that is happening on the advanced Active Directory session. But today's session is going to be on the understanding of Active Directory, and installing them is one of the thing which I can do. The reason is probably you guys can install it and then explore yourself and then try to understand using TechNet links or any other blog link that you find. And whenever there is another session that is on Active Directory advanced mode, you can actually join the session, and then you can go further on that. All right. So that's about the AD, installing AD, and we can actually show you one more thing, that is actually the AD sites and services. That's something which I actually told to actually that we should be taking care of it at the very end. So if I look into the AD sites and services, I can see that it's just opening up. One moment. How did I go there? Like Server Manager, Tools, AD Sites and Services. I mean Active Directory, Sites and Services. Okay, it's actually opened up. And if I go to the site, I can see there is a site. And inside the sites, there is a server. Okay, so if I want to actually create a site, the option is going to be right-click on the site and then say New Site. And then I can actually give a site name that is going to be Mumbai, and it's going to say what is the site link you have to use, and I only have one site link right now, and that's going to use an IP that is RPC over IP basically, and I'm fine with it, and click OK, and it has been created. So how did that site link came in picture? If I want to create an extra site link, basically what is happening, if I go into the intersite transport IP, there is a this is the default site link it took. So if I want to create another site link, basically right click there and create a site link, and then over there you can actually give the name of the site link, like say I can say Mumbai to Bangalore, and I'm fine with this. This is going to be connecting the default first site name and the Mumbai, and I'm going to say OK, and then that is created. So many of you want to make sure that the very first site name it automatically created should be renamed. That can be possible. You right click, rename. Let's rename that to Bangalore. All right. So so this is a Bangalore site, and if probably I want to make sure that the servers are there here, and if I want to actually see this way, I installed a server in the Bangalore by mistake when I was installing. So how do I move it to the Mumbai? Just click on that and move it here. That should be moved across. Or else if you want to actually move it to Bangalore, but probably if you want to move it back to Bangalore, you can actually either do it that way, or else you can actually click on that and move and select Bangalore, and it should go back to where it was. All right. And the other thing was the global catalog server. How do you see who is the global catalog server? For that, you have to go to the AD sites and services, expand the probably let's actually minimize everything. All right, then I'll go back to that in the step-by-step. Go into the sites, go into the site name, and go to the servers and expand the server name, and go to the NTDS settings and go to properties. And you can see there's a checkbox, and that says it is a global catalog. So if you installed, you saw this option when you were installing, like you saw a checkbox which asks you to select for global catalog. So, but that's not the only way to promote or install a global catalog. Suppose you have a domain controller running in the organization, and you want to promote that to a global catalog. What you have to do is the same thing. Go into the AD sites and services, go to the site name, and go to the server NTDS setting properties, and select the checkbox for the global catalog, and that should take care of promoting that to a global catalog. And you should find it here. Amount of time it will take to publish the global catalog varies depending on your replication topology, which means if you have too many servers, too many Active Directory servers, it may take some time. But once the global catalog is activated, you need to go back to the event viewer and see there should be an event that says the server is promoted to a global catalog. And then at that point, you can actually start using it as a global catalog. All right, and so that's about it. And as I said, this was basically a very basic session to give you an overview of Active Directory. And at least this much should be good enough to actually move ahead and then learn at least, or maybe an Exchange server, and then whenever you want to actually learn better about Exchange or better on Active Directory, you probably can either come back or probably go through some TechNet articles which talks more about Active Directory. And probably you need to go through some of the command lines like the rep admin command line, and some other commands like, say, probably I think that's something that we can cover even today. Like, say, what if I want to actually replicate everything across? I probably will use a command which is rep admin space / sync all, and that's there in the slide as well. That's the command I can use if I want to actually replicate. I probably can run that across if I actually open up rep admin and / sync all, and that's basically going to sync the Active Directory. And then I can see here callback message sync all finished, so terminated with no errors. So there's no issues in that. So that's one way. And there are multiple other ways, and probably we should be discussing that whenever we are learning an advanced level on Active Directory. So for now, that's it. I want you to go through the sessions, probably if you want to go through that again, and install an Active Directory yourself. And if you are actually trying to find how to install one and you don't have a lab machine on you, that should not be an issue, because if you see, there is actually virtual labs that are available from Microsoft which will allow you to do a lot of practice. I just actually have one open here. Like, say, if you go to this particular link, I'll actually put this in the slide as well, and that particular link is going to go to Windows Server 2012 Virtual Labs. And if you are trying to install Active Directory, this is the lab which you want to connect to, and it will have exactly same configuration. There will be a DC that is running at contester.com. There is a server 1 and server 2. Basically, you have 3 servers, which means if you want to install another domain controller in server 2 as an additional domain controller, you can do that. So you have an option to do a lot of things in that particular virtual lab, and you can see here it basically runs for almost more than almost, like, say, 86 minutes, is more than 1 hour. So I already used it for almost half an hour. So this have a fair amount of timing to test everything, and I would recommend to go through that and install them. If you're finding difficulty creating a lab yourself, basically one thing is you need a system with a good amount of RAM, and another thing is the ISO to install Windows. So if you are finding difficulty to get that in the short period of time, you probably can go through this TechNet link, connect to the virtual labs, and then do whatever you want. And whenever you're done with that, you can actually exit the lab environment, and that should be it. Discard the current session, and you will be out of the lab. All right, so I'll put back the slide and the share. All right, so that was about the installing Active Directory. All right, so all good? Perfect. So that's the end of the part 2, and it's time for questions. And then another thing is, if you do not have anything right now in your mind, it should be fine. You can actually go through roadtomaster.ms. Probably I can actually show you what happens when you click there. One moment. Let me share my screen back. Okay, are the Alright, roadtomaster.ms is going to go to beta.roadtomaster.com/learning. Maybe that'll be out of beta in some time. And you may find a lot of options here, like the home, about me, the technology names, whichever you want to actually go through. And if you go into Active Directory, this is where you will find details about the session that is happening right now. And this is about the part 1, which happened last time. And probably you can just go through that, and then if you want to see the recording, there should be a recording available on the YouTube, and then you can go through these, and then if you have any questions, just put up as a comment over here, and I should be good to return back to you in around 48 hours max. So there should be more sessions are added up in this website, and then if you want to go through and follow me with any updates, you can either go to these Facebook page, that is facebook.com/roadtomaster, and that should have almost every update which happens, even actually a link to join online sessions if there are any happening. And I would like to thank you all basically for joining for the session, and basically it was actually quite a lot informative to understand each other, and then understand what are the requirements by many, and we probably should connect back with another session in the near future. All right, so it's really good to hear from you, and then whatever questions you have, you can either reach to me, and either via my blog, and we'll probably be able to return back to you with an answer as soon as possible. And again, I would like to thank you all.